Most people think they need $1 million to retire. But here's the shocking truth. After looking at real data from the Federal Reserve and Social Security Administration, the typical American retires with far less than that. In fact, nearly 80% of Americans have less than $100,000 saved for retirement. And yet, millions of retirees are still living comfortably. So what's going on? Are people secretly retiring with more money than they admit? Or is the entire idea of the $1 million retirement completely misunderstood? Today, we're going to look at the real numbers behind retirement in America. Because once you see the data, you might realize you're much closer to retirement than you think. Part 1. The retirement number. Everyone gets wrong. Most people retire on a number that would probably surprise you. Not because it's huge, not because it's impressive, but because it's much smaller than what most people think. After working as a financial advisor for more than 20 years, I can tell you something that almost no one says out loud. Most people exaggerate. Your neighbor exaggerates. Your uncle exaggerates. Your former boss exaggerates. People love to say things like, "Oh yeah, I retired with $1 million. We had about $2 million saved when we stopped working." But after decades of actually seeing people's financial statements, retirement accounts, and real net worth numbers, I can tell you something important. The reality is very different. And understanding that reality matters. Because if you believe everyone else has millions saved, you might spend years of your life oversaving, overworking, and overstressing about money you may never actually need. So today we're going to do something different. Instead of guesses, instead of opinions, we're going to look at actual data. Real statistics from the Federal Reserve, Goldman Sachs, the Survey of Consumer Finances, the Social Security Administration. And by the end of this video, you'll know how much people actually retire with, why the numbers people talk about are often misleading, and what the typical retirement really looks like. But before we get to the big chart that explains everything, we need to start with a very simple question. How much money do people actually save for retirement? And the answer may surprise you. Part 2. The shocking reality of retirement savings. So let's start with the raw numbers. According to the Employee Benefit Research Institute, EBRI, and the Federal Reserve Survey of Consumer Finances, the latest data shows something that surprises almost everyone the first time they see it. Nearly 80% of Americans have less than $100,000 saved in retirement accounts. Let that sink in for a moment. 8 out of 10 people, less than $100,000. And within that group, a huge portion actually has nothing saved at all. Zero. No IRA, no 401k, no Roth account, just Social Security and whatever they can live on. Now, before we go further, there's something very important to understand about this number. This statistic refers specifically to retirement accounts. Things like 401k plans, traditional IRAs, Roth IRAs, Roth 401ks. It does not include other assets like home equity, brokerage accounts, savings accounts, business ownership. So to get a clearer picture of retirement wealth, we need to look at something broader. That brings us to the next metric, net worth. Net worth simply means everything you own minus everything you owe. For most households, that includes retirement accounts, savings, investments, and the equity in their home. So what does the data say? According to the Federal Reserve, the median household net worth for Americans nearing retirement looks like this. For ages 55 to 64, about $365,000. That means half of households have more than $365,000 and half have less. For ages 65 to 74, the number actually increases slightly to around $410,000. And that may seem strange at first. After all, people are already retiring at that point. Shouldn't their wealth be going down? But in many cases, something interesting happens in the early years of retirement. Investment portfolios may still be growing, homes may continue increasing in value, and retirees often aren't spending aggressively yet. So wealth can actually increase slightly during the first years of retirement. But eventually, that trend reverses. For people 75 and older, the median net worth drops again to roughly $335,000, which means that over time, retirement savings begin to get used exactly as they were intended, to support life. Now, here's where the numbers get even more interesting. Because averages only tell part of the story. What about the top savers? What does it actually take to be considered wealthy in retirement? That's what we'll break down next. And the numbers might surprise you. Part 3. What it takes to be in the top 25% of retirees. Now that we understand the median numbers, let's look at the other side of the spectrum. Because many people assume that the normal retirement saver has $1 million or more. But when researchers break down the numbers by percentiles, the picture becomes much clearer. Using data from the Federal Reserve Survey of Consumer Finances, analysts at Kiplinger Personal Finance looked at what it actually takes to reach the top tiers of retirement wealth. And here's what they found. To be in the top 25% of Americans nearing retirement, the typical household net worth is about $1.2 million. Remember, this number includes everything: retirement accounts, savings, investments, home equity, other assets. So that $1.2 million is not just a 401k. It's the entire financial picture of a household. And when we go even higher up the ladder, the numbers become even more interesting. To reach the top 10% of households, the data shows that net worth jumps dramatically. For people between 55 and 64, it rises to about $3 million. For those 65 to 74, it stays right around $3 million. In other words, if a household has around $3 million in net worth, they are already among the top 10% of retirees in America. And that tells us something important. When you hear people casually talk about retiring with millions, they are describing a group that represents a very small percentage of the population. Not the majority. Not even close. But here's something else that dramatically affects how much people end up with in retirement. And it's not investment returns. It's not the stock market. It's something much more personal: marriage and divorce. Because when researchers looked at decades of financial data, one factor showed a huge difference in retirement wealth. And the numbers are striking. Part 4. The factor that quietly changes retirement wealth. Now here's something most people don't expect. One of the biggest factors affecting how much people have in retirement isn't investment returns. It isn't the stock market. And it isn't even income. It's marital status. Researchers studying long-term financial outcomes noticed a very clear pattern when they tracked people over decades. The data comes from the National Longitudinal Study of Youth, a long-running research project that has followed Americans for more than 30 years. When they looked at retirement wealth based on marital history, the differences were dramatic. Households where couples remained married had average household assets of about $650,000. Now compare that to households that had been remarried after divorce. Their assets dropped to around $460,000. That's already a significant decline, but the biggest drop appears in households where individuals were divorced and remained divorced. Those households averaged roughly $167,000 in total assets. That's a massive difference. And interestingly, people who never married at all also tended to accumulate far less wealth. In many cases, their retirement savings were only about 1/3 of what married couples accumulated. Why does this happen? The answer is actually pretty simple. Married couples often benefit from shared economic advantages: 2 incomes instead of 1, shared living expenses, shared financial responsibilities. For example, 2 people living in the same house don't pay double the housing costs. Utilities don't double. Groceries increase, but not by twice as much. So over decades, those small financial efficiencies compound into significantly larger retirement savings. Now, of course, raising children can add substantial expenses, but the long-term data still shows that households with stable marriages often accumulate more wealth over time. But there's another factor that might be even more surprising. Because according to a study by Goldman Sachs, people who have something very simple tend to retire with significantly more money. Not because they earn more, not because they invest better, but because they do something most people never do. They create a written financial plan. Part 5. The 27% advantage. Most people ignore. Now here's something that sounds almost too simple to matter, but the data says otherwise. According to a study from Goldman Sachs, people who have a written financial plan tend to accumulate 27% more wealth than people who don't. 27%. And what's interesting is that this comparison was done across similar income levels, so it wasn't just comparing wealthy households to lower-income households. Researchers looked at people earning $50,000, $100,000, $200,000, or more. And within those groups, the households that had a formal financial plan consistently ended up with about 27% more saved for retirement. Why? Part of the answer is behavioral. People who create a financial plan are usually more intentional about money. They track their spending, they save consistently, they make deliberate investment decisions. But there's another powerful effect that often gets overlooked. A financial plan gives people something extremely valuable: confidence. Confidence that they're saving enough. Confidence that their retirement timeline is realistic. Confidence that they understand their numbers. Without that clarity, many people live with constant uncertainty. They wonder, are we saving enough? What if we run out of money? What if we retire too early? That uncertainty often causes people to either overspend or oversave out of fear. A clear plan reduces that anxiety, and that clarity tends to produce better financial decisions over time. But there's another piece of the retirement puzzle we haven't talked about yet, and it might be the single most important source of retirement income for millions of Americans: Social Security. Because when people ask the question, how much do most people retire with? They're usually thinking only about savings. But in reality, retirement income often comes from multiple sources, and for many households, Social Security is the foundation of that income. Part 6. The role of Social Security in retirement. Now let's talk about something that often gets overlooked in retirement conversations: Social Security. When people think about retirement savings, they usually focus only on their personal accounts. 401ks, IRAs, Roth accounts, investment portfolios. But for millions of Americans, the largest and most reliable source of retirement income isn't their investments, it's Social Security. According to the Social Security Administration, the average monthly benefit as of early 2025 is approximately $1,976 per month. That works out to about $23,700 per year for an individual. For a married couple where both spouses receive benefits, that income can easily exceed $40,000 to $45,000 per year combined. And that income is extremely important because it provides something most investment portfolios cannot guarantee: lifetime income. No matter how long you live, Social Security continues to pay. But when you start claiming benefits, also matters. You can begin receiving Social Security as early as age 62, but there's a trade-off. If you claim at 62, your benefit will be permanently reduced. For most people, that reduction means receiving roughly 70% of what you would receive at full retirement age. For many Americans today, full retirement age is 67. If you wait until 67, you receive 100% of your calculated benefit. And if you delay even longer, something interesting happens. Your benefit continues increasing by about 8% per year until age 70. That means if you wait until 70, your monthly payment can reach about 124% of your full retirement benefit. So the decision of when to claim Social Security can dramatically affect the income you receive for the rest of your life. But now, we need to address one of the biggest myths in retirement planning: the idea that you absolutely need $1 million to retire. Because when we look at the real data, something surprising appears. Very few people actually reach that milestone. Part 7. The $1 million retirement myth. Now let's talk about the number that dominates almost every retirement conversation: $1 million. For years, that number has been treated like the gold standard of retirement. Financial headlines talk about it constantly. Friends bring it up in conversations. And many people quietly assume that if they don't reach $1 million in retirement savings, they've somehow failed. But when we look at the actual data, something surprising appears. According to research highlighted by The Ascent, a financial publication connected to The Motley Fool, the percentage of Americans who actually reach that milestone is extremely small. Only about 3.1% of Americans have saved $1 million or more, specifically in retirement accounts. Not net worth, not home equity, just retirement accounts. That means roughly 97% of Americans retire with less than that amount. And when you raise the bar even higher, the numbers shrink even further. Households with $5 million or more represent only about 3.2% of Americans. So the idea that everyone needs $1 million in order to retire simply doesn't match reality. That doesn't mean having $1 million is a bad goal. Of course, it's a fantastic financial position. But the real question people should ask themselves is this: are you sacrificing too much of your life chasing a number you may not actually need? Because retirement planning isn't just about accumulating the biggest possible account balance. It's about building a life that is financially sustainable and personally fulfilling. And that brings us to one final insight that many people overlook. How much you need in retirement depends just as much on how much you spend as it does on how much you save. Part 8. The real secret to retirement satisfaction. Many retirement models assume that people need about 80% of their pre-retirement income in order to live comfortably. But interestingly, research suggests that number may actually be much higher than necessary. According to a study from Goldman Sachs, retirees reported very similar levels of satisfaction even when their retirement income dropped significantly. When researchers looked at how satisfied retirees were with their financial situation, they discovered something fascinating. People earning between 50% and 80% of their pre-retirement income reported almost identical levels of satisfaction. In other words, many retirees were just as happy earning half of what they earned during their working years. Why? Because retirement changes how people live. Work-related expenses disappear. Commuting costs disappear. Retirement contributions stop. Often mortgages are paid off. Children are financially independent, and daily life becomes simpler. So expenses naturally decline. Now, none of this means saving money for retirement isn't important. Of course it is. But the real goal isn't to accumulate the largest possible number. The real goal is to build a financial life that supports peace of mind. And when we look at the full picture, we see something encouraging. Between personal savings and Social Security benefits, many retirees are able to maintain comfortable lifestyles without needing millions of dollars. Which leads us to the most important takeaway of all: the truth about what most people retire on. So when someone asks how much do most people actually retire with, the honest answer is this: much less than you probably think. Many retirees have less than $100,000 in retirement accounts, total household net worth between $300,000 and $400,000, and a significant portion of their retirement income coming from Social Security. That doesn't mean retirement is easy, but it does mean the narrative we often hear, that everyone needs millions saved, simply isn't supported by the data. The real keys to retirement success tend to be much simpler. Spend less than you earn, build a financial plan, understand how Social Security fits into your income, and focus on creating a lifestyle that matches your resources. Because retirement isn't about competing with your neighbor's portfolio. It's about building a life where your money supports the things that matter most. And sometimes, understanding the real numbers can be the first step toward finding that peace of mind.